Hashtag the last fleet, the emergency beacon cut through the darkness of space like a dying scream. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching as the last human colony ship disappeared into the void beyond the galaxy's edge. Behind them, the combined fleets of the Galactic Council waited with weapons powered and shields raised, ensuring humanity's exile was complete. "Admiral, all civilian vessels have crossed the boundary," reported Commander Torres, his voice heavy with the weight of their species' banishment. 200 million souls cast out into the empty dark. Chen's jaw tightened as she watched the energy barrier shimmer to life behind them, a wall of pure force that would prevent any human ship from ever returning. The technology was beyond anything humanity had achieved, crafted by species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia before humans had even discovered fire. The vote had been unanimous among the Council's 47-member species. Humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable, too willing to fight when others sought peace. They called humans a contamination of chaos that threatened the galaxy's carefully maintained order. The final straw had been humanity's refusal to surrender their military fleet and accept status as a protectorate under Zephyrian rule. "We gave them everything," whispered Dr. Elena Vasquez from her station at the science console. "Our technology, our culture, our friendship. And they repaid us with exile." Chun turned to face her bridge crew, the best and brightest that humanity had to offer. These men and women had served with distinction across a dozen star systems, had fought alongside alien allies they thought were friends, had bled and died for a galaxy that ultimately saw them as nothing more than violent primitives. "They made a mistake," Chin said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the bridge. "They think banishing us will make us disappear, make us fade into the darkness, and die quietly. They see us as children with dangerous toys, too immature to play in their perfect galactic sandbox." She moved to the main view screen, where the galaxy hung in all its spiral glory, billions of stars that humans would never again be allowed to visit. But they've forgotten something crucial about humanity. We don't give up. We don't fade quietly into the night. When you push us into a corner, when you take everything from us, we become something else entirely. The bridge fell silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems and the distant whisper of the ship's engines. Chun could feel the weight of history pressing down on them all. This wasn't just the end of humanity's place in galactic civilization. It was the beginning of something new. Commander Torres signaled the fleet. "All ships are to begin Phase 1 of Operation Exodus. We have work to do." Torres nodded sharply. "Yes, ma'am. Transmitting now." As the orders went out across the human fleet, Chun allowed herself a small, cold smile. The Galactic Council thought they had solved their human problem by casting them into the void. They had no idea they had just created something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The exile had begun 3 years ago with a single incident that spiraled out of control. The Kithara, an ancient species known for their pacifist philosophy, had established a research station in the Kepler Nebula to study exotic matter formations. When a quantum cascade threatened to tear a hole in space-time itself, the Galactic Council had ordered the immediate evacuation of the system. Humanity had disagreed. While 46 species fled in terror from the expanding anomaly, human ships had charged directly into the chaos. Admiral Chun herself had led the mission, commanding a task force of 12 vessels into the heart of the quantum storm. They had worked for 72 hours straight, using experimental technology and sheer human stubbornness to collapse the cascade and save not just the Kithara research station, but 3 inhabited systems that would have been consumed by the expanding rift. The galaxy should have celebrated humanity's heroism. Instead, they have been terrified by it. "You act without consultation," the High Counselor of the Zephyrian Empire had declared during humanity's trial. "You ignore established protocols. You take risks that no rational species would consider. You are a danger to the ordered peace we have maintained for 10,000 years." The prosecutor had been Veltar a Zephyrian diplomat whose blue-scaled features never showed emotion, but whose yellow eyes burned with contempt for the human delegation. Honored council members, we have observed this species for 50 years since first contact. In that time, they have been involved in more military conflicts than all other member species combined. They refuse to accept their place in the natural hierarchy. They question authority. They innovate without permission. They are, in short, a threat to everything we have built. Humanity's defense had been led by Dr. James Morrison, their most skilled diplomat and xenobiologist. He had stood before the assembled council with dignity and passion, speaking of human achievements in medicine, agriculture, and technology. He had reminded them of the lives saved, the problems solved, the unique perspective humanity brought to galactic civilization. It hadn't mattered. The vote was 46-1 in favor of exile, with only the Altarians abstaining, and even they had made it clear they thought humanity was too aggressive for proper galactic society. The sentence was immediate and irreversible. All human ships, stations, and colonies were to be abandoned. Humanity had one standard galactic year to gather their people and depart beyond the galaxy's edge, never to return. Now, 3 years later, that sentence had been carried out. 200 million humans drifted in the emptiness between galaxies, their ships running on fumes, and their hope all but extinguished. The civilian population didn't know about Operation Exodus. They didn't know about the secret preparations that had begun the moment the exile order was issued. They thought they were heading into exile and slow death in the cosmic dark. They were wrong. Admiral, reported Lieutenant Commander Parr from the communications station, we're receiving confirmation signals from all fleet groups. Operation Exodus Phase 1 is proceeding on schedule. Chen nodded. Phase 1 was the gathering, bringing together every human ship, every resource, every scrap of technology and knowledge they had managed to preserve or steal during their forced exodus. It would take months to complete, but when it was done, humanity would be ready for Phase 2. The building phase. Ma'am, Dr. Vasquez said hesitantly, are you certain this will work? The energy requirements alone will be met, Chen interrupted. Humanity has always excelled at one thing above all others, Doctor. We adapt. When the galaxy was young and full of predators, other species built walls and hid behind them. Humans picked up sticks and fought back. When other species accepted their limitations, humans broke through them. The Council thinks exile will teach us our place. Instead, it's going to teach us who we really are. The main screen flickered, displaying a star chart of the local group, the collection of galaxies that included their former home. Humanity had been exiled to the space between galaxies, but that didn't mean they were isolated. There were resources here if you knew where to look. Dark matter streams, rogue planets, ancient artifacts left behind by species that had transcended physical existence eons ago. And there were other things in the darkness between stars, things the galaxy's comfortable, established species had forgotten or chosen to ignore. Set course for the Void Yards, Chun commanded. Maximum burn on all engines. It's time to begin the real work. As the Defiance led the human fleet deeper into the intergalactic void, Chun thought about the message they would eventually send back to the Galactic Council. It would be brief and to the point, delivered by quantum burst transmission that would reach every inhabited system in the galaxy simultaneously. The message would be simple. We're coming home. But first, they had an empire to build. The Void Yards had been discovered by accident during the second year of preparation for exile. Commander Lisa Park, then captain of the exploration vessel Curiosity, had been mapping rogue star systems when her ship's sensors detected something that shouldn't have existed, a massive artificial structure floating in the darkness between galaxies. The yards were ancient beyond measure, built by a species that had vanished long before any of the current galactic powers had achieved spaceflight. The technology was incomprehensible but functional. Automated systems still operated after millions of years, maintaining and repairing the vast construction facilities that could build ships larger than anything in recorded history. More importantly, the yards were empty and unclaimed. The galaxy's established species had never ventured this far into the void, content to stay within their familiar spiral of stars and planets. They had no idea the yards existed, no conception of the industrial might that waited in the darkness for someone bold enough to claim it. That someone was humanity. "Admiral, we're approaching the yards now," Commander Torres announced. "All fleet elements are reporting ready for insertion into the construction base." Chen smiled as the view screen filled with the impossible sight of the void yards. The structure stretched for thousands of kilometers in all directions, its dark metal hull studded with lights that pulsed in patterns that might have been communication or might have been art. Docking bays large enough to accommodate entire fleets yawned open in the structure's sides, while manufacturing centers worked with tireless efficiency to transform raw materials into components for ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. "Begin docking procedures," Chun ordered, "and signal all department heads. I want a full briefing on Project Renaissance in 1 hour." Project Renaissance was humanity's secret weapon, the culmination of 3 years of preparation and planning. While the galaxy's attention had been focused on the exile proceedings, human scientists and engineers had been working around the clock to understand and adapt the alien technologies they had encountered during their decades in galactic society. They had made breakthroughs that would have seemed impossible just years before. Fusion reactors that could power entire star systems. Weapons that manipulated space-time itself. Shields that could deflect the energy of a supernova. And ships, magnificent, terrible ships that combined human ingenuity with technologies beyond the galaxy's current understanding. The Council had called humanity too dangerous for galactic society. They were about to discover just how right they had been. As the human fleet settled into the ancient docking bays, Chan felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The exile was over. The real work could finally begin. When they returned to the galaxy, and they would return, it would not be as the scattered refugees the Council expected. It would be as an empire terrible in its power and implacable in its purpose. The galaxy had cast out humanity when they were weak and divided. They would return united, strong, and absolutely unstoppable. The age of human exile was ending. The age of the human empire was about to begin. The forging 5 years had passed since humanity's arrival at the Void Yards, and the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. What had once been empty construction bays now hummed with activity as millions of humans worked alongside ancient automated systems to build something the galaxy had never seen, a true interstellar empire. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in the primary research laboratory, watching as her team made final adjustments to their greatest achievement. The Genesis engine floated in a containment field, its crystalline structure pulsing with energies that bent reality itself. It was beautiful, terrible, and absolutely revolutionary. "Final calibration complete," announced Dr. Yuki Tanaka, her chief engineer. "The Genesis engine is ready for full-scale deployment." Vasquez nodded, unable to keep the pride from her voice. Humanity's masterpiece. The builders who created the Void Yards will be amazed to see what we've accomplished with their tools. The Genesis engine was the culmination of human adaptation and innovation. Using principles reverse-engineered from alien technologies and combined with uniquely human approaches to problem-solving, the engine could terraform entire star systems in a matter of months rather than millennia. More than that, it could create habitable worlds from raw asteroid fields, generate artificial gravity wells to capture rogue planets, and even stabilize dying stars to extend their lifespans by billions of years. It was technology that the Galactic Council had actively suppressed among their member species, fearing the chaos that might result from rapid territorial expansion. They preferred the slow, careful colonization methods that kept populations stable and governments controllable. Humanity had no such concerns. "Dr. Vasquez," came Admiral Chen's voice over the communication system, "please report to strategic planning. We're ready to begin Phase 2. Vasquez made her way through the Void Yard's corridors, marveling at how completely humanity had transformed the ancient structure. Where once there had been empty spaces designed for unknown alien purposes, now there were hydroponics bays growing food for millions, residential sectors housing entire communities, and manufacturing centers producing technologies that surpassed anything in galactic civilization. The journey to strategic planning took her past the shipyards, where humanity's new fleet was taking shape. The vessels under construction bore no resemblance to the ships humanity had used during their time in galactic society. Those had been built to alien specifications, designed to fit within established parameters of what was considered appropriate for a younger species. These new ships were purely human in conception and terrifying in their implications. The Retribution-class dreadnoughts stretched for 15 kilometers from bow to stern, their hulls crafted from metamaterials that could shift between phases of matter at will. They carried enough firepower to sterilize entire systems, but their most fearsome weapon was their Genesis torpedoes, missiles that could deliver concentrated Genesis engine technology to transform enemy worlds into human colonies within hours. The Vengeance-class carriers were even larger, mobile cities that could launch thousands of fighter craft and serve as orbital command centers for planetary invasions. But more than their size or firepower, what made them truly dangerous was their AI systems. Not artificial intelligences in the traditional sense, but uploaded human consciousnesses that retained all their creativity, intuition, and tactical brilliance while gaining the processing speed of quantum computers. The galaxy species had long debated the ethics of consciousness transfer and had ultimately banned the practice as too dangerous. Humanity had no such qualms. "The enemy of my enemy," Admiral Chun had said when the first volunteer pilots underwent the upload process, "is the beginning of a beautiful friendship with myself." Vasquez entered strategic planning to find Admiral Chun standing before a massive holographic display showing the local group of galaxies. Red markers indicated human positions, while blue showed known Galactic Council territories. The scale was staggering. Hundreds of billions of stars spread across millions of light years, with humanity currently occupying a tiny fraction of intergalactic space. "Doctor," Chun greeted her with a nod. "How are our Genesis engines performing?" "Beyond all expectations," Vasquez replied, taking her place at the conference table alongside the other department heads. "We've successfully terraformed 12 rogue planets and created 3 artificial star systems. Our population has grown to over 400 million, and our industrial capacity exceeds anything we achieved during our time in the galaxy." Chun smiled. "Excellent. Commander Torres, what's the status of our fleet construction?" "First wave is complete," Torres reported, his voice carrying satisfaction and anticipation in equal measure. 200 Retribution-class dreadnoughts, 50 Vengeance-class carriers, and support vessels numbering in the thousands. Each ship is crewed by our best personnel, with uploaded consciousness backups for all critical positions. "Our intelligence networks?" Chun asked, turning to a woman Vasquez didn't recognize. "Operational," the woman replied. "Director Sarah Kim, Intelligence Division. Our deep cover agents have successfully infiltrated 43 of the 47 Council species. We have complete intelligence on their military capabilities, political structures, and strategic weaknesses. More importantly, we've identified significant dissatisfaction among several younger species who feel marginalized by the current power structure." She nodded approvingly. "And our secret weapon?" Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, leaned forward. "The hegemony protocol is ready for deployment. We've successfully adapted the neural control technology we discovered in the Andorian archives. Any species that attempts to resist our expansion can be pacified without permanent harm." Vasquez felt a chill at Webb's casual tone. The hegemony protocol was perhaps humanity's most controversial development, a technology that could override alien nervous systems and make entire populations compliant to human rule. It was bloodless conquest, but conquest nonetheless. "I want to be clear about our objectives," Chun said, her voice taking on the formal tone she used for official pronouncements. "We are not returning to the galaxy as refugees seeking readmission. We are returning as conquerors. The Galactic Council cast us out because they feared what we might become. We're going to show them their fears were completely justified." She gestured to the holographic display, zooming in on the Milky Way. The Council controls approximately 60% of the galaxy's habitable systems. The remaining 40% is either unexplored, contested, or controlled by species too primitive for Council membership. Our first objective is to claim that 40% for ourselves. "What about the Council?" asked Commander Torres. "They won't just sit by and watch us expand." "No, they won't," Chun agreed. "Which is why our second objective is to systematically destroy their military capacity while offering generous terms to any species willing to join the human empire voluntarily. The choice will be simple: submit to human rule and retain autonomy over internal affairs, or face complete conquest and occupation." Dr. Vasquez shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, are we really prepared to wage war against 47 different species? Even with our technological advantages, we won't be fighting 47 species," Director Kim interrupted. "Our intelligence indicates that at least 15 Council species are already considering withdrawal from the Alliance. The younger races are tired of being treated as junior partners, while some of the older species are beginning to question whether the Council's rigid structure can adapt to changing galactic conditions." Shin nodded. "The Council's strength has always been their unity. Remove that, and they become just another collection of individual species defending their own interests. Divide and conquer isn't just a human strategy. It's the only strategy that works against a larger, more established enemy." "There's another factor," Webb added. "Our psychological profile of Council species indicates they have no experience dealing with truly aggressive expansion. For 10,000 years, they've maintained peace through consensus and mutual deterrence. They've forgotten how to fight a real war against an enemy that doesn't share their cultural constraints. While we," Chun said with cold satisfaction, "have been fighting wars since before we discovered fire. It's what we do. It's what we're good at. And it's exactly what the Council tried to suppress when they demanded we become civilized members of galactic society." The meeting continued for hours as the department heads outlined their preparations for what would become known as the Great Return. Every aspect of the campaign had been planned with meticulous detail: which systems to target first, which species to approach for alliance, which technologies to deploy for maximum psychological impact. But beneath all the strategic planning lay a deeper purpose that none of them spoke aloud. This wasn't just about reclaiming humanity's place in the galaxy. It was about proving that the Council had been wrong to exile them, wrong to treat them as children, wrong to believe that human aggression could be contained or controlled. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you pushed humanity beyond the point of patience. As the meeting concluded and the department heads dispersed to oversee final preparations, Vasquez remained behind with Admiral Chun. The two women stood in comfortable silence, watching the holographic display cycle through images of the galaxy they would soon reclaim. "Do you ever wonder," Vasquez asked quietly, "what we might have become if they hadn't exiled us?" Chun considered the question for a long moment. Peaceful farmers on a dozen worlds, probably. Happy citizens contributing to galactic science and culture. Willing participants in someone else's vision of order and progress. And now we become what they always feared we were. What they perhaps always knew we would become if they pushed us too far. Chin turned to face her, and Vasquez was struck by how much the Admiral had changed during their years in exile. The diplomatic restraint was gone, replaced by something harder and more focused. They want to save the galaxy from human chaos. Instead, they guaranteed it. The irony is, Vasquez mused, we probably would have been content to remain junior partners in their galactic civilization. We respected their age and experience. We were willing to learn from them. Were, Chen emphasized, past tense. That willingness died the day they cast us out. Now we return not as students, but as teachers. And the lesson we're going to teach the galaxy is simple. Never underestimate humanity's capacity for adaptation. The next morning, Vasquez was awakened by the sound of ships launching. Through her quarters viewport, she could see the first elements of the human fleet departing the void yards, their engines burning bright against the cosmic dark. Each ship carried with it the hopes and anger of 400 million humans who had been told they weren't good enough for galactic society. They were returning to prove that assessment catastrophically wrong. The Genesis fleet moved first, spreading out to claim and terraform dozens of systems along the galaxy's edge. These would become humanity's new colonies, staging areas for the larger campaign to come. Each world would be a fortress, a factory, and a home for humans who would never again accept second-class status. Behind them came the war fleet, its massive dreadnoughts and carriers ready to enforce humanity's new territorial claims. The ship names told their own story. Retribution, vengeance, defiance, rebellion, conquest. These were not the names of a species seeking peaceful reintegration. They were the names of an empire announcing its birth. And finally came the integration fleet, carrying the technologies and specialists needed to bring conquered worlds into the human empire. The hegemony protocol would ensure compliance, while Genesis engines would transform alien worlds into human paradises. It would be bloodless conquest when possible, but conquest nonetheless. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at her laboratory window, watching humanity's future deploy across the void. In 6 months, they would make contact with the galaxy's edge territories. In a year, they would begin the systematic conquest of unclaimed systems. In 5 years, they would be powerful enough to challenge the Galactic Council directly. The Council had exiled humanity to prevent them from disrupting galactic peace. They were about to discover they had simply given humanity time to prepare for war. The age of galactic tranquility was ending. The age of human dominion was about to begin. The return. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Retribution, humanity's flagship, as her fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler sector. Before them stretched a sight that would have been impossible just 8 years ago, a human armada of such size and power that it dwarfed anything in recorded galactic history. 2,000 ships spread across space in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with metamaterials that bent light around them like captured starfire. Each vessel was a masterpiece of engineering that combined human innovation with technologies beyond the galaxy's current understanding. They had come not as exiles seeking readmission, but as an empire announcing its arrival. Signal from the advanced scouts, Admiral, reported Commander Torres. We have visual confirmation of the Altarian border station. They're hailing us on standard diplomatic frequencies. Chin smiled coldly. The Altarians had been the only species to abstain from the exile vote 8 years ago, claiming they needed more time to consider humanity's fate. It was fitting that they would be the first to witness humanity's return. Open a channel, Chun ordered. Full spectrum broadcast. I want every listening post in 3 sectors to hear this. The main screen flickered to life, showing the familiar blue-scaled features of an Altarian diplomat. Chin recognized the patterns on his face. This was Governor Zethvar, the same official who had processed humanity's departure from Altarian space during the exile. Unknown vessels, Zethvar began, his voice carrying the formal tones of interspecies diplomacy. You are approaching sovereign Altarian territory. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. Governor Zethvar, Chin replied, her voice carrying clearly across the communication channel. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Human Empire. I believe you remember me from our last meeting 8 years ago. The Altarian's eyes widened in recognition, his facial scales shifting through colors that indicated shock and disbelief. Admiral Chun? But the humans were exiled. The barrier is still in place, Chun confirmed. We simply found another way home. I'm here to inform you that the human empire is officially claiming sovereignty over all unclaimed systems in this sector. We're also here to offer Altarian civilization choice. A choice. Zethvar's voice had risen in pitch, a sure sign of stress among his species. Join the human empire as an autonomous partner, retaining full control over your internal affairs while accepting human leadership in external matters. Or maintain your current alliance with the Galactic Council, and face the consequences when we inevitably come into conflict. The silence on the channel stretched for several seconds. Chen could almost see the governor's mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. The humans weren't supposed to return. They certainly weren't supposed to return with a fleet that could challenge the established galactic order. Admiral, Zethvar said finally, surely you understand that what you're proposing is impossible. The Galactic Council will never accept human expansion beyond the exile zone. This can only lead to war. Governor, Chen replied with perfect calm. War was declared the day the Council voted to exile us. We're simply choosing the time and place for hostilities to begin. The question isn't whether there will be conflict. It's which side Altaria will choose when that conflict comes. She gestured to her tactical officer. Mr. Park, please display our fleet strength for Governor Zethvar's benefit. The transmission split screen, showing the Altarian governor alongside a tactical display of the human fleet. Zethvar's expression shifted from disbelief to terror as the scope of humanity's military might became clear. 2,000 ships, Chun said conversationally, each one more powerful than anything in the current galactic fleet. And this is just our first wave. The shipyards at Void Station produce 50 new vessels every standard month. At current production rates, we'll have the largest military force in galactic history within 2 years. This is madness, Zethvar whispered. You can't possibly hope to challenge 47 species. 47 species bound by committee decision-making, conflicting interests, and 10,000 years of peaceful stagnation, Chen corrected, versus one species with unified command, advanced technology, and what you might call a serious grievance against the current galactic order. She leaned forward slightly, her expression hardening. Governor, I'm going to give you and your people 12 standard hours to make your decision. After that time, we'll consider any Altarian ships in unclaimed space to be acting in support of the Galactic Council, and we'll respond accordingly. And if we choose to join your empire? Zethvar asked hesitantly. Then, Altaria becomes the first non-human member of what will soon be the dominant power in this galaxy. Your people retain their homeworlds, their culture, their right to self-governance. All we ask is that you acknowledge human leadership in external affairs and contribute to our mutual defense. 12 hours, Zethvar repeated numbly. 12 hours, Chun confirmed. Choose wisely, Governor. This offer won't be extended twice. The transmission ended, leaving Chun alone with her bridge crew. Around them, the vast human fleet hung in space like a promise of things to come. Each ship represented months of planning, years of preparation, and the focused anger of a species that had been cast out of their home. Admiral, Commander Torres said quietly, intelligence reports that the Altarians are transmitting emergency communications to Council space. Word of our return will reach the core worlds within 6 hours. Good, Chen replied. I want them to know we're coming. Fear is a weapon, Commander, and the Council has forgotten what it feels like to be afraid. Time to remind them. Dr. Vasquez emerged from the ship's science section, her expression troubled. Admiral, we're receiving distress calls from the outer colonies. It seems word of our return is causing panic among several species. 3 governments have already declared martial law. Expected, Chun said with satisfaction. The galaxy has enjoyed 10,000 years of peace and stability. They've forgotten what happens when someone challenges the established order. Their panic will work in our favor. Frightened people make poor strategic decisions. But, Admiral, Vasquez pressed, innocent civilians are suffering because of that panic. Should we what, Doctor? Abandon our plans because some aliens are worried about human expansion? Did they show such concern for human civilians when we were being exiled? Chen's voice carried a hard edge that silenced any further protest. The galaxy chose to treat us as a threat. Now they get to live with the consequences of that decision. The next several hours passed in tense preparation as the human fleet waited for the Altarian response. Across the sector, emergency transmissions flew between star systems as word of humanity's return spread like wildfire. The carefully maintained peace of the galactic community was beginning to fracture as species scrambled to determine their response to this unprecedented threat. At exactly 12 hours after the deadline, Governor Zethvar's face appeared on the bridge's main screen. The Altarian looked as though he hadn't slept, his scales pale with stress and exhaustion. Admiral Chun, he began formally. After extensive consultation with our government and our people, Altaria has decided to accept your offer of autonomous partnership within the human empire. Chun nodded approvingly. A wise decision, Governor. You and your people will not regret it. However, Zethvar continued, we must ask for certain guarantees regarding our cultural autonomy and territorial integrity. Granted, Chun replied without hesitation. The human empire has no interest in micromanaging internal affairs. All we require is unity in external policy and mutual defense. And regarding our obligations to the Galactic Council, are now void, Chun said firmly. From this moment forward, Altaria is under human protection. Any attempt by the Council to punish you for this decision will be considered an act of war against the human empire. As the formal transfer of allegiance was concluded, Chun felt a surge of satisfaction. The first domino had fallen. The Altarians were a relatively minor power, but their defection would send shockwaves through the galactic community. If humanity could convince one council species to switch sides, they could convince others. Signal the fleet, Chun ordered. All ships are to proceed to designated coordinates for Phase 3 deployment. It's time to claim our new territories. The human armada split into multiple task forces, each heading for unclaimed star systems along the galaxy's rim. These systems have been ignored by the council species for centuries, too far from the galactic core to be valuable, too close to the dangerous outer rim to be safe. For humanity, they were perfect. Admiral Chen's personal task force made for the Herculean cluster, a collection of young star systems rich in heavy elements and potentially habitable worlds. It would take 3 weeks to reach their destination, but when they arrived, they would begin the process of establishing the human empire's first territorial claims within the galaxy proper. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said, approaching Chen's command chair, I've been analyzing the data from our intelligence networks. The Council's initial response seems to be confused. Explain. They're treating this as a diplomatic crisis rather than a military threat. Their emergency session is focused on whether to negotiate with us or reinforce the exile barrier. There's no discussion of military mobilization or defensive preparations. Chun laughed, a sound devoid of humor. They still think we're the same primitive species they exiled 8 years ago. They can't conceive that we might have developed the capability to challenge them directly. But surely they must realize they realize nothing because they choose to realize nothing, Chun interrupted. For 10,000 years, the Council has maintained order through the threat of superior force. No member species has ever challenged that order because none of them possess the technology or the will to do so. They assume we're bound by the same limitations. She gestured to the tactical display, showing their fleet's progress in an unclaimed space. The Council's biggest weakness is their assumption that all species think like they do. They value stability over growth, consensus over innovation, peace over progress. They can't imagine a species that would choose conflict over comfort. And that's why they'll lose. That's why they've already lost, Chin corrected. They just don't know it yet. 3 weeks later, the human fleet arrived at the Herculean cluster to find it exactly as advertised. 23 star systems containing 47 potentially habitable worlds, rich asteroid belts, and enough raw materials to support a civilization of billions. More importantly, it was completely unoccupied. Begin immediate terraforming operations, Chen ordered as her ships spread throughout the cluster. Deploy Genesis engines to all suitable worlds. I want this entire region habitable within 6 months. As the massive terraforming devices were deployed, Chen watched the Genesis engines begin their work. Atmosphere processors hummed to life on barren worlds, while gravity generators carved out stable orbital zones around suitable stars. It was technology beyond anything the galaxy had seen, and humanity was using it to claim an empire in the span of months rather than millennia. Admiral, Commander Torres reported, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. High-priority diplomatic channel. Put it through, Chen ordered, settling back in her command chair with anticipation. The familiar blue-scaled features of Veltar, SEK, the Zephyrian prosecutor who had argued for humanity's exile, appeared on the main screen. His yellow eyes burned with barely controlled anger as he delivered his message. Humans, SEK began without preamble. You are in violation of Galactic Council Resolution 7749, which forbids your presence within the galactic boundary. You will immediately cease all territorial expansion and withdraw to the exile zone, or face the consequences of defying Council authority. Chen smiled. Counselor SEK, how pleasant to see you again. I trust you remember me from our last encounter 8 years ago. Admiral Chen, CK replied coldly. I remember you as the representative of a species too dangerous for civilized society. Your current actions prove that the Council was correct in its assessment. On the contrary, Chen replied smoothly, our current actions prove that the Council created exactly the threat it claimed to be preventing. You exiled us because you feared what we might become. Now you get to see your fears made manifest. This aggression will not stand, SEK declared. The Council commands the loyalty of 46 species. You are one species, however advanced your technology might be. 45 species, Chen corrected. The Altarians have wisely chosen to join the human empire rather than face conquest. And our intelligence suggests that several other species are reconsidering their commitment to an organization that has clearly lost control of galactic security. SEK's expression darkened. You think you can divide the Council? Break apart an alliance that has maintained galactic peace for 10 millennia? I think, Chen replied with cold certainty, that your alliance was built on the assumption that no one would ever challenge it. You've grown comfortable, Counselor. Soft. You've forgotten that power must be constantly defended, not simply declared. We have not forgotten, CK said. The Council fleet is mobilizing as we speak. If you do not withdraw immediately, you will face the combined might of 45 species. Let them come, Chen said, leaning forward in her chair. We've been preparing for this confrontation for 8 years. Our ships are ready. Our weapons are charged. Our people are unified in purpose. She paused, letting her words sink in. But more than that, Counselor, we're angry. 8 years of exile have taught us exactly what we think of galactic justice. I look forward to sharing that lesson with your fleets. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in silence. Around them, the work of empire building continued as Genesis engines transformed dead worlds into future human colonies. So, Commander Torres said quietly, it's war. It was always going to be war, Chen replied. The only question was whether it would be on our terms or theirs. Now we have our answer. She stood and walked to the main view screen, where the lights of a dozen human ships could be seen scattered across the Herculean cluster. Each light represented thousands of humans working to build something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. An empire forged in exile and tempered by betrayal. An empire that would either rule the galaxy or see it burn in the trying. The human empire had announced its presence with the conquest of the Herculean cluster. The Galactic Council's response would determine whether that conquest continued or expanded into total war. Either way, the age of galactic peace was over. The age of human supremacy had begun. Hashtag the war, the Battle of the Meridian Gate, would be remembered as the moment the galaxy learned to fear humanity once again. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as the largest fleet in galactic history emerged from hyperspace before them. The combined might of 45 species stretched across space in a formation that should have been overwhelming. Instead, Chun felt only cold satisfaction. Enemy fleet composition confirmed, reported Commander Torres, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they faced. 3,700 ships representing 38 species. No sign of Altarian vessels. As expected, Chen replied. The Altarians had honored their agreement with humanity, despite enormous pressure from their former allies. 7 other species had quietly withdrawn their fleets from Council service, claiming mechanical problems or supply shortages. The galaxy's unity was already beginning to fracture. Admiral, called Dr. Vasquez from her science station. Their formation is textbook. Classic Council fleet deployment from their tactical manuals. They're operating exactly as we predicted. Chen smiled. 10,000 years of peace makes for predictable enemies. Mr. Park, signal the fleet. Execute Battle Plan Omega. The human force was smaller, only 800 ships, but what they lacked in numbers they more than compensated for in technology, training, and sheer tactical innovation. As the Council fleet approached in their traditional formation, the human ships began to move in patterns that would have seemed impossible to conventional tactics. The Vengeance-class carriers launched their fighters, not traditional spacecraft, but uploaded human consciousnesses in quantum-enhanced combat frames that could accelerate at forces that would liquefy biological pilots. They moved through space like schools of deadly fish, weaving between enemy formations and striking at vulnerable points with precision no living pilot could match. The Retribution-class dreadnoughts fired their primary weapons, not energy beams or kinetic projectiles, but Genesis torpedoes that tore holes in space-time itself. Each torpedo created a brief but devastating gravitational anomaly, crushing enemy ships or pulling them into pocket dimensions from which there was no return. But the most devastating weapons were the Hegemony Pulse ships, vessels specifically designed to deploy humanity's neural control technology on a mass scale. As they moved through the enemy formation, alien crews suddenly found themselves unable to fire on human ships, their nervous systems hijacked by technology they couldn't understand or resist. "My God," whispered Dr. Vasquez as she watched the battle unfold. "We're not just winning. We're demonstrating absolute superiority." The Council fleet, so impressive in its size and unity, began to disintegrate under the human assault. Ships that had served together for centuries turned on each other as hegemony pulses took control of their crews. Others simply vanished as Genesis torpedoes erased them from existence. The few vessels that managed to fire on human ships found their weapons ineffective against metamaterial hulls that could shift between dimensions. "Admiral," Torres reported, "enemy fleet is requesting parley. Multiple species are transmitting surrender signals." "Denied," Chun replied without hesitation. "This isn't a negotiation, Commander. This is a demonstration. The galaxy needs to see what happens when you challenge the human empire." The battle lasted 6 hours and ended with the complete destruction or capture of the Council fleet. Of the 3,700 ships that had emerged from hyperspace, less than 300 escaped to carry word of humanity's victory back to the core worlds. But the true victory wasn't measured in ships destroyed or territory claimed. The true victory was the message it sent to every watching species across the galaxy. The humans had returned, and they were no longer the primitive species that had been exiled 8 years ago. In the aftermath of the battle, Admiral Chun addressed the captured crews of the Council ships. Hundreds of alien species were represented among the prisoners, some defiant, others terrified, all struggling to understand how their overwhelming advantage had been turned into crushing defeat. "You fought bravely," Chen told them, her voice carried to every holding bay and detention center across the human fleet. Your ships were well built, your tactics were sound by conventional standards, and your coordination was impressive for such a large multi-species force. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. But you made one critical error. You assumed we were still the same species you exiled 8 years ago. You thought exile would weaken us, divide us, force us to accept our place as outcasts from galactic civilization. The alien prisoners listened in silence, many of them still struggling with the reality of their capture. Instead, exile made us stronger. It united us in purpose. It gave us time to prepare, to innovate, to become something the galaxy has never seen before. You didn't exile a defeated enemy. You created one. Chen activated a holographic display showing human territorial expansion over the past months. Red markers indicated human-controlled systems, spreading like a cancer across the galaxy's outer rim. 18 star systems have fallen to human control in the last month alone. Our Genesis engines are terraforming worlds faster than your species can evacuate them. Our fleets are growing stronger with each captured shipyard, each acquired technology, each species that chooses to join us rather than face conquest. The display shifted to show intelligence projections of continued human expansion. At current rates, the human empire will control 50% of galactic territory within 2 years. We will achieve complete galactic dominance within 5. The only question remaining is whether your species will join us willingly or be absorbed through conquest. A Zephyrian officer, his blue scales pale with shock, stepped forward. Admiral, surely you don't intend to conquer the entire galaxy? The logistics alone are manageable with proper technology and organization, Chen interrupted. You're thinking in terms of traditional galactic expansion, slow, careful, limited by biological constraints and committee decision-making. We think in terms of exponential growth, unlimited by the political paralysis that has kept your species stagnant for millennia. She gestured to another display showing human population growth in their new territories. Our birth rates have tripled since exile. Our industrial capacity doubles every 6 months. Our technological advancement proceeds at a pace your species find impossible to match because we don't waste years debating the ethics of innovation. This is madness, the Zephyrian officer protested. No single species can govern an entire galaxy. The cultural differences alone will be preserved under human administration, Chen replied calmly. The human empire has no interest in destroying alien cultures or imposing human customs on non-human populations. All we require is political submission and resource contribution to the imperial economy. She smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Think of it as a protection service. We protect you from external threats, maintain interstellar order, and ensure efficient resource distribution. In return, you acknowledge human authority and contribute to the Empire's continued expansion. The days following the Battle of the Meridian Gate saw a cascade of surrenders as word of the Council fleet's destruction spread throughout the galaxy. 7 species formally petitioned to join the human empire, while 12 others declared neutrality and withdrew from Council membership. But not all species were prepared to submit to human rule. The Zephyrian Empire, the oldest and most powerful council member, mobilized its entire fleet for a desperate counterattack. The proud blue-scaled species that had prosecuted humanity's exile refused to accept defeat, gathering their most advanced ships and their most experienced crews for what they called the final defense. Admiral Chun met their challenge at the Zirian system, where the Zephyrian homeworld hung in space like a blue jewel. This time, she brought not just her fleet, but the full might of human technological superiority. The battle lasted less than 3 hours. Genesis torpedoes tore through Zephyrian shield networks like they were tissue paper. Hegemony pulses turned entire squadrons of enemy ships into unwilling allies. Human fighters, freed from biological limitations, danced between enemy formations with impossible grace and lethality. When the orbital defense platforms fell silent and the last Zephyrian warship surrendered, Chen opened a communication channel to the planet's surface. "People of Zephyria," she announced, her words broadcast to every communication device on the planet's surface. "Your government chose to resist the inevitable. That choice has cost you your fleet, your defenses, and your independence." The blue surface of Zephyria filled the main screen, its cities glittering like scattered gems across vast continents. Billions of Zephyrians waited to learn their fate from the species they had helped exile. However, Chun continued, "The human empire recognizes the contributions your species has made to galactic civilization. Your scientists, your artists, your philosophers, they will continue their work under human protection. Your children will grow up in a galaxy finally unified under effective leadership." She paused, knowing her next words would echo through history. Effective immediately, Zephyria becomes the capital of the Imperial Outer Rim territory. Your government will be dissolved, but your people will retain full cultural autonomy under human administration. Resistance will be met with the deployment of hegemony technology. Cooperation will be rewarded with prosperity and protection. The surrender of Zephyria sent shockwaves through the remaining council species. If the Empire's oldest and most powerful member could fall to human assault in a matter of hours, what hope did smaller species have? The answer came swiftly: none. Over the following months, human fleets swept through the galaxy with methodical precision. Some species surrendered immediately, accepting imperial rule in exchange for cultural preservation. Others attempted resistance and found themselves facing weapons and tactics beyond their comprehension. The Kithara, with their pacifist philosophy, offered no military resistance, but attempted to organize humanitarian opposition to human expansion. Their efforts ended when hegemony pulse ships arrived at their homeworld and simply switched off their ability to resist imperial authority. The Andraxian collective attempted to use their hive mind advantage to coordinate a multi-system defense. Human cyber warfare specialists infiltrated their neural networks and turned their own coordination abilities against them, causing massive confusion that ended organized resistance within days. The thermal hierarchy tried to retreat to their fortress worlds in the galactic core, hoping their advanced defensive technologies would prove insurmountable. Genesis torpedoes simply erased their fortifications from existence, while hegemony pulses turned their defenders into enthusiastic imperial supporters. With each victory, the human empire grew stronger. Captured technology was reverse-engineered and improved upon. Conquered industrial capacity was converted to imperial ship production. Absorbed populations provided both workers and soldiers for continued expansion. But perhaps most importantly, each victory demonstrated to watching species that resistance was not just futile, it was pointless. Dr. Vasquez found Admiral Chun in her quarters aboard the Retribution, reviewing reports from the latest territorial acquisitions. The ship was approaching the Sol system, humanity's original home, abandoned 8 years ago during the exile. "Admiral," Vasquez began hesitantly, "I've been reviewing our expansion statistics. We now control 67% of galactic territory. Our population has grown to over 2 billion humans, with another 50 billion non-human subjects under imperial authority." Shin nodded without looking up from her reports. "Ahead of schedule. Our projections suggested it would take another year to reach this level of territorial control. That's what concerns me," Vasquez continued. "We're succeeding beyond our wildest expectations. Every species that resists falls within days or weeks. The Galactic Council has effectively ceased to exist as a governing body." "Your point, Doctor?" Vasquez took a deep breath. "My point is that we've won. The galaxy acknowledges human supremacy. The exile has been avenged. Perhaps it's time to consider moderation in our expansion." Chen finally looked up, fixing Vasquez with a stare that carried the weight of 8 years of planning and preparation. "Moderation, Doctor? The same moderation the Council showed when they voted to exile us." The same moderation they demonstrated when they cast 200 million humans into the void to die. But, Admiral, we've proven our point. The galaxy knows we can't be ignored or dismissed. Surely we can. Can what? Chun interrupted. Return to being junior partners in someone else's civilization? Accept a place at the table as long as we promise to be good little humans who don't upset the established order. She stood and walked to the view screen where Earth hung in space ahead of them, blue and green and beautiful, exactly as humanity had left it 8 years ago. The Council had their chance to treat us as equals, Doctor. They chose exile instead. Now, they get to live with the consequences of that choice. We don't stop expanding until every system in this galaxy acknowledges human authority. But the cost is acceptable, Chun finished. The galaxy wanted to know what would happen if humanity was pushed beyond the breaking point. Now they know. As the human fleet approached Earth, Admiral Chun reflected on how much had changed since their exile began. Humanity had left this system as refugees, cast out, and despised by a galaxy that saw them as too dangerous for civilized society. They were returning as conquerors, with an empire that spanned thousands of systems and ruled over species that had once considered humans primitive savages. The exile had been meant to teach humanity its place in the galactic order. Instead, it had taught the galaxy its place under human rule. The war was essentially over, though scattered resistance continued in the outer territories. Within months, the last independent systems would fall to human assault, and the galactic age of human supremacy would be complete. Admiral Sarah Chun, exile turned empress, had achieved what no human leader in history had dreamed possible: the complete conquest of the Milky Way galaxy. But, as Earth grew larger in the view screen of the Retribution, she found herself wondering what challenges would come next. After all, there were other galaxies out there, and humanity was no longer interested in accepting limitations. The Empire 10 years had passed since humanity's return to Earth, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the one that had exiled them 18 years ago. Admiral Sarah Chun, now bearing the title Empress of the Human Galactic Empire, stood in the observation deck of the Imperial Palace that orbited Earth. Before her stretched a view of a transformed solar system, bustling with activity that would have been unimaginable during humanity's time as a council member species. Massive shipyards surrounded every planet, their construction bays churning out vessels for an empire that now controlled 93% of the galaxy. Genesis engines had transformed Mars, Venus, and dozens of moons into garden worlds teeming with human colonies. The asteroid belt had been converted into a vast mining and manufacturing complex that supplied raw materials for continued imperial expansion. But most impressive of all were the Transcendence Gates, massive ring structures that allowed instantaneous travel between any 2 points, and the technology had been developed from principles discovered in the Void Yards, refined through conquered alien knowledge, and perfected by human ingenuity. What had once taken months of hyperspace travel could now be accomplished in minutes. "Your Majesty," came a voice behind her. Chin turned to see Dr. Elena Vasquez approaching, her hair now silver with age, but her mind as sharp as ever. The former scientist had become one of the Empire's most trusted administrators, overseeing the integration of conquered species into Imperial society. "Elena," Chun greeted her old friend. "How are the integration protocols proceeding?" "Beyond all expectations," Vasquez replied, consulting a datapad. "The Zephyrian populations have adapted remarkably well to Imperial governance. Their productivity has increased 40% since implementing the hegemony protocol modifications. Cultural preservation is proceeding as planned. Their art, literature, and philosophical traditions continue to flourish under Imperial protection." Chen nodded approvingly. The hegemony protocol had evolved far beyond its original design as a weapon of conquest. What had begun as neural control technology had been refined into a sophisticated system of behavioral modification that eliminated resistance while preserving individual personality and creativity. conquered species didn't become mindless slaves. They became enthusiastic imperial citizens who genuinely believed human rule was in their best interests. And the Outer Rim territories? Chen asked. Pacification is 97% complete. The last pockets of resistance are concentrated in 3 systems near the galactic edge. Admiral Torres estimates complete subjugation within 6 months. Excellent. And our expansion into the Magellanic Clouds. Vasquez's expression grew animated. The advanced fleets have established beachheads in both galaxies. Genesis engines are already terraforming suitable worlds, and construction of Transcendence gates should be complete within a year. We're projecting full territorial control of both satellite galaxies within the decade. Chun smiled with satisfaction. And then, well, there are other galaxy clusters beyond the local group. Your Majesty, Vasquez continued more hesitantly. There is one matter that requires your attention. The Zephyrian Science Council has made a discovery they believe you should know about. Oh, Chen's interest was piqued. The Zephyrian scientists had proven remarkably useful since their integration into the Empire. Their ancient knowledge, combined with human innovation and unlimited resources, had produced technological breakthroughs that seemed almost magical. They've detected signals from outside the local group. Very faint, but definitely artificial. The pattern suggests another galactic empire of comparable technological advancement. Chun felt a thrill of excitement. Another empire? How far? Approximately 50 million light-years in the direction of the Virgo cluster. The signals are old, perhaps 20,000 years, but the implications are staggering. If another species has achieved galactic-scale civilization, then they represent either a potential ally or a future conquest, Chen finished. Fascinating. Have the science teams begun developing long-range exploration capabilities? Already underway, Your Majesty. The theoretical work suggests it's possible to extend Transcendence gate technology across intergalactic distances, though the power requirements would be enormous. Power is no longer a constraint, Chen reminded her. The Empire now harvested energy directly from black holes and stellar cores, providing virtually unlimited resources for any project. Begin construction of an intergalactic exploration fleet. I want to know who sent those signals and whether they pose a threat to Imperial expansion. As Vasquez departed to implement the new orders, Chen returned her attention to the view of Earth below. The planet looked much as it had during humanity's days in the Galactic Council, but everything else had changed beyond recognition. Humanity itself had evolved. The average human citizen of the Empire possessed capabilities that would have seemed godlike to their ancestors. Genetic modifications eliminated disease, extended lifespan to centuries, and enhanced physical and mental abilities far beyond baseline human norms. Neural interfaces allowed direct communication with the Empire's vast computer networks, while consciousness transfer technology made death itself optional for those who could afford the procedure. The Empire's non-human citizens have been offered similar enhancements, though few possess the psychological resilience to handle such radical self-modification. Most alien species prefer to remain in their original forms while benefiting from Imperial protection and prosperity. But for humans, transformation was simply another tool of Imperial expansion. Your Majesty, came another voice. Chun turned to see Admiral Torres approaching, his body showing the modifications common among the Empire's military leadership. His eyes glowed with neural implants that provided direct tactical data feeds, while subcutaneous armor plating gleamed beneath his skin. Admiral, Chun acknowledged. I trust the fleet expansion is proceeding smoothly? Ahead of schedule, Your Majesty. Current production stands at 500 ships per week across all construction facilities. At this rate, we'll achieve our target of 1 million active vessels within 18 months. And crew requirements? Torres smiled. Consciousness uploading has eliminated our manpower constraints. A single uploaded human mind can operate a dreadnought-class vessel with greater efficiency than a crew of thousands. We're no longer limited by biological reproduction rates or training time. Chen nodded. The decision to embrace consciousness uploading on a massive scale had been controversial, but the strategic advantages were undeniable. Uploaded human minds retained all their creativity and tactical brilliance while gaining processing speeds that made them superior to any biological crew. Death in battle simply meant transferring to a new quantum substrate, a minor inconvenience rather than a permanent loss. Of course, the technology raised questions about the nature of consciousness and identity that some humans found disturbing. But such philosophical concerns were luxuries the Empire couldn't afford during its expansion phase. Admiral, Chen said, I want you to begin planning for intergalactic operations. Dr. Vasquez will brief you on the details, but we may have detected another technological civilization outside the local group. Torres's enhanced eyes brightened with interest. First contact protocols, Your Majesty, to be determined based on their capabilities and intentions. If they're peaceful and willing to accept Imperial authority, we'll offer them the same terms we've given other species. If they're hostile or expansionist, they'll be conquered like all the others, Torres finished with satisfaction. Precisely. The galaxy has learned that human supremacy is not negotiable. If necessary, we'll teach the same lesson to the rest of the universe. As Torres departed to begin preliminary planning for intergalactic expansion, Chen found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought humanity to this point. 18 years ago, they had been exiles cast into the void by species that considered them too dangerous for galactic civilization. Those species had been right to fear humanity, but they had been catastrophically wrong in thinking exile would solve their problem. Now, every major species in the galaxy lived under human rule. Their worlds had been terraformed to human preferences, their populations modified to ensure loyalty, their cultures preserved as museum pieces in an empire that would last forever. The Galactic Council Chamber on Galax Prime had been converted into a memorial to the old order, a reminder of what happened to those who opposed human expansion. Veltar, the Zephyrian prosecutor who had argued for humanity's exile, now served as a curator of the memorial, his consciousness modified to feel genuine gratitude for the opportunity to preserve the history of humanity's rise to power. It was, Chen reflected, a fitting end for the species that had started this conflict. Your Majesty, came yet another voice. This time it was Director Sarah Kim, head of Imperial Intelligence, whose work had made peaceful conquest possible for dozens of species. Director, Chen acknowledged. What news from the outer territories? The last resistance cells have been eliminated, Your Majesty. The galaxy is now completely under Imperial control. More importantly, our long-range sensors have detected something extraordinary in the Andromeda Galaxy. Chen's interest sharpened. Explain. Massive artificial structures orbiting the galactic core. The energy signatures suggest a civilization that has achieved Kardashev scale type 3 status. They're harvesting energy from the entire galaxy. A peer competitor, Chun mused. How fascinating and concerning. Indeed, Your Majesty. If they've achieved galactic-scale energy harvesting, their military capabilities could rival or exceed our own. Chen smiled coldly. Then, it's fortunate we've had 2 decades to prepare for exactly this kind of challenge. The Empire didn't conquer this galaxy by accepting limitations. If Andromeda is inhabited by a peer competitor, then we'll simply have to prove our superiority. Shall I begin intelligence gathering operations? Immediately. I want to know everything about this Andromedan civilization, their technology, their social structure, their weaknesses. If they're peaceful, we may be able to negotiate a division of the universe into spheres of influence. If they're expansionist, they'll discover why the galaxy fears humanity. Kim finished. Exactly. As the day progressed, Chen met with representatives from across the Empire. The Altarian governor reported continued economic growth in their sector. The Kithara Cultural Preservation Committee requested additional funding for their historical archives. The uploaded consciousness of a former Zephyrian admiral provided tactical assessments for the planned Magellanic cloud operations. Each meeting reinforced the same basic truth. The Empire was prospering beyond all projections. Conquered species weren't just surviving under human rule, they were thriving. Crime had been eliminated through the Hegemony Protocol. Poverty had been abolished through efficient resource distribution. Disease and aging had been conquered through genetic modification and consciousness transfer. From a purely utilitarian perspective, human conquest had been the best thing that had ever happened to the galaxy. But Chen knew that history was written by the victors, and the Empire's propaganda networks ensured that no alternative narratives could take root in the conquered populations. That evening, Chen stood alone in her private quarters, looking out at the stars that now acknowledged her authority. Every point of light represented worlds where humans ruled, species that had submitted to imperial power, resources that fed the Empire's continued growth. It should have been a moment of pure triumph. Instead, she found herself wondering what would come next. The galaxy was conquered. The Magellanic clouds would fall within a decade. Andromeda might provide a worthy challenge, but Chen had no doubt that human superiority would ultimately prevail there as well. And then what? The universe was vast beyond imagination, filled with billions of galaxies that might harbor civilizations capable of resisting human expansion. But even if it took millennia, Chen was confident that humanity would eventually claim dominion over all of them. After all, consciousness uploading had made her functionally immortal. She would have eternity to oversee humanity's expansion across the cosmos. The Galactic Council had exiled humanity because they feared what the species might become if left unchecked. They had been right to fear, but they had been wrong to think exile would stop the inevitable. Humanity had returned from exile as an empire, and that empire would not rest until every star in the observable universe acknowledged human authority. The age of human supremacy was no longer beginning. It was eternal, and across the cosmos, ancient civilizations that had ruled for millions of years would soon learn what the Galactic Council had discovered too late. When you push humanity beyond the breaking point, you don't get compliance. You get conquest. The exile was over. The universe belonged to humanity now,